Norway is crazy when it comes to infrastructure, particularly road design. Like road design and infrastructure, pipe infrastructure is what we do. And I think a lot of the times around here, anyway, we see the building, right? And a lot of the stuff that we do goes behind the scenes. Nobody notices the road unless it doesn't work. Nobody notices the pipe unless it doesn't work, right?
Welcome to episode 1 of the workshop presented by Aplin Martin. We sat down with Don and John and had a great conversation about starting a land development project, their dream location to design a project, and what it means to have your work leave a lasting impact on your community. It was a lot of fun recording this one. I hope you enjoy it. Here's Don and John.
So I guess before we kind of get into today's topic about what actual land development is, you guys want to give me a brief background about yourselves and how you guys kind of get started in the field, how you guys got it started at Aplin.
Yeah, for me, I've always been surrounded by construction my entire life. So my dad's a general contractor, worked as a utility constructor, road constructor. So I've been around construction my entire life, and it kind of seemed to fall hand in hand with an aptitude for math and physics and land development engineering for me. So that's kind of how I fell into it.
So you basically had kind of, you were almost influenced from a younger age, I guess you could say.
Definitely, yeah. There's like some really cool old photos of me like sitting in like on my dad's lap while he's like operating an excavator.
Okay, cool.
Stuff like that. So.
I can almost say that I kind of had the same experience, I guess. My grandfather was an engineer for the city of Toronto when he first got to Canada. And then my dad as well was an engineer for city of Mississauga now currently. So kind of almost the same path, I guess you could say.
Family lineage.
Yeah,
Love it.
Exactly.
So for me, I was same thing, physics, math. That was my expertise. I loved it in high school. And my idea was, okay, I want to go become an architect. And I decided that engineering was the path to become a good path to go down that road. And I got to university and I was like, I don't want to be the guy saying, oh, let's do this, and then being told by an engineer, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so I stopped at engineering, and here I am.
You wanted to be the guy to actually have a final say versus
exactly.
the guy versus the middleman.
Arguably, we're in land development, and there's not that much overlap, but I still like to be the guy that says, hey, whoa, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
Very cool. So let's talk about your Aplin experiences now. How many years have you guys been in Aplin? I know you guys were kind of telling us off air that you guys have known each other for a little while now, so when you guys can get into that.
Yeah, John and I actually almost have the exact same start date we figured out
pretty much
half an hour ago. Yeah. So me and John started within a week from each other in November 2016, and I've both been in Aplin for like 7 years now. Yeah. So.
And who was the first one again that started?
Don started first.
He's got 1 week more experience than you.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
Now that being said, I've been in the industry for 15 years, where Don's only been here for 11. So we not to say that we're both very, very knowledgeable on what we do, right? So which is a very valuable resource.
Very cool. So now, if you want to get a little bit into the roles and responsibilities that you guys each hold, I know you guys are from the same branch, but if you guys have different roles or different responsibilities, if you guys want to talk a little bit about that day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think our roles on projects are very similar in terms of like managing the design team, overseeing the approval process, like facilitating construction of our projects. But it's interesting. Like I work on a lot of like residential development projects across the region, and John has a bit of a different specialty.
Okay.
My sort of focus is predominantly on sort of the much larger scale projects, lots of master plan redevelopment stuff around Metro Vancouver, and also an institutional sort of slant. I've fostered some great relationships with a couple of the big school districts here, and so we're working on some of the biggest schools basically in BC, here in Vancouver, which is pretty exciting. But it's the same sort of process to a point.
Yeah.
But there's different sort of facets to it.
Yeah.
That requires a different approach.
Do you guys ever cross over kind of into each other's projects, or you guys ever working together? Do you ever fact check each other's work, something like that, or?
We do for sure. John and I use each other as resources constantly because, at the end of the day, like the core tenets of what we do on a daily basis is very similar. And if one of us hasn't bumped into an issue, like the other one surely has.
Yeah.
So we've been able to use each other as a resource, which has been critical. Especially like one thing that John's team does a ton of is like these mall redevelopment projects, which are coming to fruition as the landscape of the commercial retail space just changes. Frankly, there's not a lot of businesses looking for like a brick and mortar location in a mall anymore. So the malls are being redeveloped into like multi-purpose, like commercial and living space, with like towers above. And so like John's done a number of those projects, and I got my first one this year. So kind of like waddled my way into his office and was like, "Dad, what do I do?" Right?
Yeah,
like
teach you the ways.
Yeah. So
Ultimately, I think there's so many of these sort of big projects on the out there.
Yeah.
I can't do it all, and so spread the love a little bit and spread it around.
I think that's the biggest thing too in engineering. A lot of people think that one person can kind of take the project from beginning to start and that's it. Whereas it's almost the opposite, right? You're always reaching out to other people, not only within like your own consulting team, but again, within your own office, right? Because like you said, everybody's got a different experience. And like at the end of the day, it's not just your initials on it, but it's like the Aplin or the brand that you're representing, right? So why not have an extra set of eyes and someone else's expertise that can add to it?
I think it's also sort of the market right now is like we have these massive projects that are on the ongoing, and not, to your point, not one person can be involved. They're just either too complicated, or they're too big, or they're too long. Like some of the things I'm working on right now, I won't see the end of. I will pass it on to my team or the next generation that's coming up, below us to take on that lead role at some point in time, which that has a certain amount of excitement to it, and it's fun to bring in that next generation and get them involved, and sort of it becomes a collective effort, right?
Yeah,
Which
they're
is
legacy
exciting.
projects, right? Yeah. And I think to Julian's point as well, like our value as a project delivery team is like being able to lean on the experience that like our entire organization has. It's not just my experience, it's not just John's experience.
Yeah.
It's like how we can all help each other too, right? So.
But I think that's the best way to, not to make a sports night, but I think that's the best way that almost like a team here, that how we work is that everybody kind of has their own hand to come together to produce this kind of final product. Whereas sometimes you've heard other stories where it's like, oh, this person does this person does this, versus everybody kind of plays their own role ultimately to get to the final goal. So that in mind, let's talk about what actually is a project and what is land development and what is it in the civil engineering scope. Because not a lot of people actually know what we do or how we do it. They just see the building go up and then that's that. That's, you walk into the door and that's the building. There's a lot of things that go into it. So let's start.
Like I think for me, foundationally, land development is like repurposing land. So like you're changing the intended use of a given site. So call it like a number of schools you're working with. These schools were like, take Burke Secondary.
Yep.
It was a forested area that we are turning into a secondary school. Or like a couple of the master plan communities that I'm working on, like Northeast Albion. It's like this 80-acre master planned community that like was a bunch of 1 acre single family lots or 2 acre single family lots, and we're turning into a bunch of condos and townhomes. And it's just like it's repurposing and it's facilitating that repurposing.
And I think it starts realistically. It starts with sort of what is the plan, right? What a client comes to us, or a municipality comes to us, or somebody comes to us with an idea, and then it's interpreting that idea and sort of trying to find the the place of, okay, this is what's required, this is what's not required but might be good idea, and sort of trying to understand as a starting point where how does this come off the get off the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of you really at the beginning of the project you're talking about end goals and trying to develop a roadmap to that end goal essentially, right? So
yeah, and to add kind of to what both of you guys say, I think my definition, or not what I think of what land development is, but it's almost the needs of the future, like you said, right? So you're taking one thing that may have been useful, say 10 to 15 years ago, but in 10 to 15 years, is that single story storefront still going to be useful? Like in Toronto now, a lot of redevelopments downtown, they're going to be repurposing kind of these heritage buildings, and now they're going upwards, right?
Sure.
Because we have a little bit of a housing problem, and that's the only way to do it, right?
Shockingly.
There is, you're not, no,
housing issue.
yeah, you're not able to just make more land like that. That doesn't happen. We only have a limited amount of space, right? So you got to use what's been given to us, and then kind of like you said, repurposing it and building for the future.
I think in Toronto, I'm sure I'm not as familiar with the Toronto market, but certainly here, land is also really expensive. And using the example of a mall redevelopment, an at-grade parking lot is completely inefficient.
Yeah.
And so I think that's predominantly why a lot of these big projects are coming online, and these big investment organizations are realizing that they're sitting on an asset and they're trying to take advantage of that asset, and they're building up, which is lots of fun. I'm working on one of the biggest towers in Canada right now, and sure, back to the very beginning, what we started talking about at the very beginning, I'm not involved in the building, but it's still so satisfying to be able to say, hey, we're building this 80-story tower, and that's my part in the project, right? It's lots of fun.
So now, talking about all of these big developments, obviously the process doesn't always go as smoothly as we want it to. What would you say are some general challenges that you guys would face day to day?
Some of the biggest that I face are like continued changing direction midstream. So, we talk about defining that project path and the end goals. It's like, well, if the end goal changes while we're working on this thing, then like all of us have to pivot too. So like that's one of the biggest challenges. And those changes from my perspective come from both like the approving body and the client sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. So it's like getting stick thrown in your bike tire spokes when you're riding down the street
halfway
sometimes.
through at full speed.
I think for me, probably just the nature of the type of people that I'm like, the organizations I'm working with, probably one of the biggest constraints is the financial side. An institution for a school district, for example, they're beholden to a certain budget, and there's only so much flexibility to change that budget. Not to say that the private side doesn't have those same constraints, but it's definitely different. One of the sort of likely challenges that definitely makes it interesting.
All right, so now off of that, what would you say you guys have learned from this, and how do you guys kind of apply it to what you do moving forward to kind of minimize what you see in those challenges?
I think communication is probably the standout for me, and I do get involved in the private side quite a bit as well, and so I know that communication, like that's a common theme through everything we do, right? Yeah. And whether that's communicating with the client about extras, or whether that's communicating with the city, the municipality, or whoever you're working with, that process really doesn't change, and I think that's one thing that we, our reputation here at Aplin is partially because we do take that piece seriously. And we endeavor to sort of work with our clients. We're not treating them as if they're it's sort of a black box.
Yeah.
It's an open sort of.
It's
discussion.
A two-way street.
It's a two-way street, exactly. And it's been very successful.
Yeah, and like just to that point, I completely agree with you. And one thing that I've learned over the years as well, and I've tried to do differently, is we're professional problem solvers. And previously, whenever identifying a problem, sometimes too often I wanted to not present the problem to the client until I had a solution for it. However, like you lose valuable time there, and like our clients want to be like a part of the decision-making process with respect to those options as well. So, one thing I've learned is just like identify and like bring your clients in, and like they want to help solve. Yeah, because they have more of a vested interest in the success of the projects than we do too, right?
Yeah, and many of them are also knowledgeable. They're knowledgeable as well in the subject. Through maybe not engineers, sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. They've had similar experience on another project, right? And
a lot of times it's not what would be their first time.
Exactly.
So. And I think I would like to, I agree with what you guys have said, and I'd almost take it one step further with how I see kind of the communication process is not only do you need to communicate kind of within your team as well with all the different kind of engineers you work with in the office, but I like to take it one step further where it's almost, I like to communicate even further with like the architects, the hydro G, and everybody else structural who may be involved. Because at the end of the day, the end goal, I get it. Everyone's got the deliverables, but everybody's got to work together in order to make the project work, right? So if you're not communicating just one-to-one with your client, right, you're also communicating one-to-one with every other consultant, right? So I think that having that stream as clear and concise as possible, because I've been on haven't been in the industry that long, but I've seen where some sort of small communication breakdown, and then all of a sudden everybody's pointing fingers at who and what went wrong, and it's right. So that's why I think and that's how I like to think about it, right? Is I'm not only helping out our company as well, right? But I'm helping out kind of all of the other consultants.
Well, and the same thing goes like internally for our own teams as well. Yeah. Because like, you know, it's one thing to like articulate our vision for the project and like solve these problems with clients and with sub-consultants. But at the end of the day, if we're not effectively communicating to like our team who's delivering our portion of the work, then like we're not going to be able to do our own work successfully either. So it goes like, you know, across all branches.
I like to think it's, you know, we're working on a job, we've already got that job, right? Sure, we've got to make sure we're doing our because we want to keep the job. But at the end of the day, it's about the next job, right? And fostering the relationships with, as you said, the whole team to see the current job we're working on successful so that you can land that next job, right? And
those next jobs don't just come from clients; they come from architects, they come from recommendations from other subs. So it's about all of those relationships in the whole honeycomb.
And you know, in the 15 years I've been involved in this, I think one thing's become very apparent, and that is it's a very, very small, very, very small community when you actually you know get right down to it. And you know, one guy you worked with on one job, he's moved to another company, and you know he's now the client. You cross paths with new people or the same people all the time. It's like, oh wow, that's.
I was gonna say, I saw you on that last one. Now you're over there.
Exactly.
But
I had that like a week ago. Proposal last week, and like John sent me a sample because like I hadn't done a proposal in a specific municipality before, and like looked at the client you were sending it to, and it was one of my clients who's now working at a different company in like a completely different sector. It was like, oh, okay, cool, there you go. Like,
the scope of the project may be so big, but the actual scope of the people working within that project may actually be smaller than a lot of people think. Now talking about the team, what do you like about Aplin's approach here to project management and how we kind of conduct our business when completing a project from start to finish?
I think for me, the word team, I think, runs at so many levels through the organization. Whether that's a project team, so me and a colleague from my team that you know working on a specific project, or whether that's my whole team, or whether that's you know the entire Surrey land development team. You know, there's 5 teams that we're all collaborating. You know, at various levels the entire way through the organization. And you know, coming back to what Don had mentioned earlier, you know, we have 55 years of experience. You know, historically, we've probably come across every different scenario, and we're not afraid to ask questions. We're not afraid to collaborate. And so it takes away from what you're working on, but you can help out your teammate, colleague, and you know, at the end of the day, it's about the success of the overall organization. And I think that sort of that culture and that mentality has been sort of ingrained in all the people that are involved, and goes a long way in you know making a great place to work.
Well, I just look at it like you know, each branch also like lends resources out to help. Like we all help each other. Too. Like John's team has a big design push. Like me and the other local groups. We'll see what resources we have available, and like we'll give them to John as soon as we can. And like we do that for each other, which because like at the end of the day, it's like an all for one for all type of mentality.
Yeah, and I can again speaking from the Toronto, even though we're all the way over there, we're probably the furthest office, obviously geographically from everybody else, but we've used resources from Vancouver as well. I've worked on projects in Vancouver as well specifically, and currently we also have one employee working on the Calgary projects too, right? So it goes both ways. And I think that's the biggest thing is where people are open to accepting different responsibilities that they may not have signed up for originally, right? And then that openness kind of within our team, I think, goes a long way.
It is pretty cool though. Like, so look at your example, like a team working in Toronto, like you get to work you get to work on projects across Canada. Yeah. Which is awesome.
Yeah. We're not so pigeonholed kind of into what we do. And you're able to use, like I remember probably one of the coolest things from working on Vancouver, or in BC, was looking at the elevations of certain on the survey being like 1 or or 2. Whereas like back home, our elevations are like 352, right? Like we're nowhere near that. But I remember looking at the survey and it was like 0.5. And I was like, I don't know.
Are the hundreds truncated?
Yeah, and I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, what is that? Like, is something wrong with that, right? And then Chesley, another coworker of ours, he was like, no, that's what it is. And I was
Literally
like,
at sea level.
yeah, right? And it was like, just because from where we don't have that, right? Our elevations there are way different than that. So I thought that was super, super cool to use for experience.
Hashtag climate change.
Yeah. Is there something you would change about the way of doing a project? One thing you could improve on the project management process or just the project design process?
I can't really think of like one thing in particular, but it's a constantly evolving process for me personally. Every project is different. There's always tidbits and learning opportunities like throughout every project. And I think the most important thing is just from one project to the next, like carry those lessons learned. And, over a large time scale, it turns into like a dramatic shift. Yeah. However, it's not, you can't like catalog those issues from 5 years and then suddenly change your process either. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just about a lot of micro adjustments.
I think for me, and this is more recent, I have a tendency to get very involved in projects. It's fun. I really like that side of the industry, but I've got a great team behind me, and doing more delegation, I think is I think one thing I definitely struggle with, and it's something that I'm working on improving, because
it's hard when you want to be a control freak.
100%, right?
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's great to, like I said earlier, it's great to see that next generation coming up and taking on that responsibility and sort of, hey, I'll give you this. I'll give you a project, and it can become yours too, right? Mm-hmm. But that's probably something that definitely I'd do differently. Start to work on those skills sooner, so that it's
when the moment happens.
When the moment happens, you're ready. You're ready for that, right?
Yeah.
So now looking back, kind of on all of your experience, stuff like that, what would you say is your favorite project, or that one that you're most proud of?
For me, it's probably my Northeast Albion master plan. So in 2018, we started working on like a master plan community for one of our clients, Epic Homes, and they own like 80 acres of a 160 acre neighborhood plan, and there was I'll say a neighborhood plan area, and there was no development, there was no land use plan, there was no engineering services plan for the area, there was nothing. And so we got to start. I distinctively remember Derek Hull and I going to like Boston Pizza, sitting at a big table like this. We brought a ton of drawings and a bunch of felts, and we had a bunch of beer and a bunch of chicken wings, and we like spent 3 hours one afternoon and like started vision planning for like the whole community. And I've been working on this project since 2018, so it's been like a 5-year process. And last year in December, we had our first home occupied in the community.
Oh wow!
Which is pretty cool, seeing it go from literally zero to like somebody living
ultimate completion
in there, right? And it's going to be a project that gets built out over the next like 8 years. There's still a ton of work to do there. But it was really proud for me being able to see it from the start to like a tangible finished product, right? So that was cool.
So for me, this was a hard question. I had to really think about this one. Before I started Aplin, I worked in Richmond predominantly, and there was an area very similar, very undeveloped, right? And I worked on sort of 2.5 of the initial 4 phases of the high density development that was happening out there. And in essence, it was my PNG application. I staked everything on this project to a degree, and it had so much meaning to me. I knew every intricate detail, every little piece, right? And I don't go to Richmond very often, but when I do, I still drive by, and it was like the catalyst project for the whole sort of what it will become the Capstan Way sort of SkyTrain station area. It was the first project in the area, and now you drive by and there's 20 towers, all very similar, but all in the same area. So that's probably for me the project that stands out as being it's kind of started all this sort of this project management path.
Yeah. So now, do you guys, whenever you guys go by those projects, if you do happen to, do you guys always point it out to whoever you're with? And you're
so funny enough, there was a time when, like, when I was in the car, my family, my son in particular, who might be listening at some point here, he whenever I say, "Oh, that's my project," or that's my project, he got to the point where he's in the back going, "Oh, but that's my project, and that's my project." So yeah, I do that all the time. I think it's something to be very proud of, right? You know, but particularly the big milestone projects we work on, it's a privilege to be able to, you know, uphold the Aplin sort of name and you know, do what we do best and put all those skills on you know, sort of on the line, right?
Yeah. So now moving on to that, what would you say before these projects? We've obviously had some struggles at like growing up and gaining experience and stuff like that. Did you guys?
That's a very good gaining experience. I've gained a lot of experience in my life, apparently.
Yeah. What would you say was your welcome to engineering moment? Either a mistake that you caught or something that happened where you realized it and you're like, oh shit, something needs to be fixed, or I need to go to somebody to help out the situation, or how can I remedy this? Maybe caught early on or just in general.
Yeah, for me, I remember like working on the first complicated cost recovery package for a piece of like community infrastructure that one of my projects had to build, and put all these like petitions together, all these complicated documents that like once they're signed, like they cannot be changed because they're endorsed by council.
Sealed and delivered, and that's
like they're done, right? So once they're signed, like that's it. And I remember getting a call from the municipal reviewer on the file who said like, you know, hey, I realize these documents are done, but you like double counted a $200,000 credit to your client in this package. And so subsequently, my client lost out on $200,000 of recovery for this, you know, multi-million-dollar piece of infrastructure. And like, I remember hanging up the phone and just like putting my head in my hands and being like, what the fuck do I do now? And, you know, like had to have I ran through all these scenarios in my head, like what I could try to do to like try to make this seem better. And it was like, you know what, at the end of the day, like I just have to call this person and like, just tell them. And, you know, I call them, tell them the issue. And the phone's like dead after I say that, and they speak after what felt like an eternity. And
it's probably 30 seconds, maybe 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, and they're like, well, I guess this is coming off of your fees then. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, I've been at Aplin for like a year. Like I'm getting fired over this for sure. And then like I didn't say anything, and the client on the other end bursts out laughing as he thought I was fucking serious. Like, so like, yeah, it's just, it taught me early on, like the attention to detail is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And like, I tend to sometimes value rate of production over
details.
Being absolutely thorough. I'm still a stickler for details, but if I were to pick one of the two, it's probably the former. Mm-hmm. And so it was one of those things like, yo, this is what's at stake. Yeah. So don't fuck it up.
I think for me, just picking up on where Don sort of left off there, don't hesitate to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Right. There are times when there is no substitution for talking directly to your client or whoever, frankly. I don't think it's limited to just a client. And I think that's something that I always have challenges with. It's, you know, again, it's, you want to find a solution, right? There's a solution out there. You want to find a solution before you, so you look like the good guy when you go to your client, right? Yeah. Or whoever. But, you know, again, they're a person to be collaborating with.
Yeah.
Right. And you know, don't shy away from that relationship, because it's much stronger than you think. And at the end of the day, it becomes that even more stronger by actually acknowledging, you know, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I am lost.
Yeah.
How do you want us to proceed, or how do you think how do you want to proceed?
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is a lot of people that are held with like professional designation, whether you're an engineer or a doctor or any sort of discipline, is a lot of people put you on this almost pedestal of, okay, you're so good at this and this is what you're going to do. But at the end of the day, we're not robots, right? Everybody is a human. Everybody, like, there are still going to be, you could be the smartest person in the world. There might be some small oversight, right? And I think the biggest thing is that you're always honest, not only with yourself. Like you said, you have to make that phone call to the client and say, I'm sure, like, your ego hurt a little bit to actually do that and be like, hey, by the way, I actually did fuck this up a little bit. how can we work to fix it, right? And I think honesty with that, and again, the two-way street of communication, I feel like that's a theme, is super, super important as to what we do.
Yeah, and dovetailing on that with like my own story there. Now, when I'm doing complicated things like that, I just get a peer review from one of my colleagues on it, and it's like such an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
That I was just didn't even think of doing. So it's important to like lean on each other as well.
Yeah, the biggest thing I think too as well, like you said, is two brains are better than one brain.
Yeah.
You're not smarter than everybody else. Like there are certain aspects, right? Even just the different viewpoint that somebody else can have. Because you'd be looking at a piece of paper for 100 hours. Might take one guy an extra 5 minutes to just look at something and point out a different mistake, right? Or not a mistake, but a different viewpoint.
There's also no wrong answer, right?
Yeah.
There's we're changing existing to new, but the path between those 2 points could take a multitude of different formats, right? And somebody might have done it in a more efficient way. Somebody might have done it just completely differently. And yeah, their way is completely wrong, but you can still gain information from that.
Yeah.
Whether that's information to be applied at the design stage or the coordination stage or the construction stage, it's still very valuable.
Yeah, well, and even like if there's a healthy debate or a conversation that takes place as a result of seeking somebody else's input, like it's just like anything. Like there's just, I guarantee you, there's a tidbit. There's a nugget of gold information in that conversation, and it's worth having the conversation for just that nugget.
100%.
Yeah, definitely doesn't hurt to reach out. What still excites you about engineering, about what you guys do, and what do you guys enjoy about it the most?
For me, it's still like the interactive problem solving. Like at the end of the day, like as we've been droning on about for however long, if our listeners are still awake, it's a complicated, complex problem solving process. And at the end of the day, once the problems are solved, it's like very rewarding to be able to celebrate the wins with like our project teams and our clients. And so that's what keeps me coming back is the team win.
I think the projects have only been getting more complicated too. Those challenges are even harder to figure out. And for me, that's what drives me. It's like, okay, well, we did this last time on this one. Well, now we can't do the same thing. We got to come up with a new solution. And I've had some wild sort of design ideas, and we've actually built them. And we've driven by, and I've used the White Rock Parkade, for example, as one of my projects where we did some crazy pipe work on the surface, and it was buried later. Like the idea that there's no wrong solution. It's only a question of does it work or not, and is it approved? Is what excites me to look at the next project and sort of figure out, okay, collaboratively with my team, we're going to put our heads together and we're going to come up with a solution. And maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not me who has the final brain idea, right? Maybe it's somebody junior on my team.
I saw that self-Freudian slips calling yourself brain dead there too. That was awesome.
Yeah, the ideas don't have to just come from me, right? There's other people on my team or outside of our team. A drafter who's working on a project, they could see things from from the perspective of the final end game here, and they come up with a final solution, right? It could come from anywhere.
Yeah, and I think the way that I like to simplify when people ask me, oh, what do you actually like about engineering aside from whatever the math and all the perks, is that you're given, the way I like to describe it is you're given, say, 6 different pieces to a puzzle every day, 6 pieces of information, and then at the end of the day, you have to figure out how exactly you're going to make all of these pieces of the puzzle work in order to come to your end goal, which would be the project completion. So, another question, where in the world would you like to design a project? If you choose one place, country, location, where would you want your one final monument to stand? As that's where I did this.
I recently went traveling in Europe, Scandinavia specifically, and I thought about this one, and I think I would pick Norway. Norway is crazy when it comes to infrastructure, particularly road design and infrastructure, pipe infrastructure is what we do. And I think a lot of the times around here anyway, we see the building, right? And a lot of the stuff that we do goes behind the scenes. Nobody notices the road unless it doesn't work. Nobody notices the pipe unless it doesn't work, right? And I think in a country like Norway, some of that infrastructure, road infrastructure, for example, the valleys and, connection between communities is challenging, right? And it actually is meaningful to the people, right?
Yeah, it's a difficult question for me to answer. To me, we're gonna cut out my stuttering here, but for me, I lean on one project in particular that I've actually completed, which was a school site that's next to the Vedder River in Chilliwack, BC. And one of my favorite hobbies is river fishing. And so it's kind of cool to me that it's right next to one of my favorite spots to fish on this river. So every time I'm going out on a weekend trip and standing on the riverbank and I can walk by this building or look at it, it's kind of a really cool marrying of what I'm passionate about and what I do every day, and what really keeps me up and I get a lot of enjoyment out of in life. The two things kind of being hybrid together. So I think that to me is the ideal project, is where it's kind of infused with everything that makes me me.
Yeah, and I think that's also the super cool thing about engineering, is that it's not just a job and it's not just your life. They're able kind of to weave into together and tie in, like you said, the river fishing versus a project, right? That's not just you doing your hobby and separating it from your job, right? There's a way to kind of that they almost come back, where it's almost more natural as to by the way, this is a cool hobby and I was able to also do this with it as an experience.
Yeah, totally.
So last question then, what is a piece of advice that you would give to young and up and coming engineers, or even to a younger version of yourselves when you were coming into the industry?
I think for me, and this is something I struggle with now, but definitely learn some time management is skills, set some clear boundaries on how you're going to sort of approach that work-life balance, because you can get very quickly into trouble with way too much on your plate. And, maybe you don't have the experience, or maybe you just don't have time to do it, right? Dovetailing on that, I think, saying yes to things is obviously how you get advance. And I know both of us, that's how we sort of advanced through the organization. We were not afraid to shy away from new things and new experiences and, helping out the overall objective, right? But at the same time, knowing when to say no is so important, because it helps to avoid or at least limit your exposure and getting into trouble.
I think for me it's learning how to manage my time better. Would be some advice that I give to my younger self, where I think it's very easy in the work that we do to get caught up in the incoming phone calls and the incoming emails and all of the fury that is the day-to-day, when there still are always these big rocks on my desk, writing this big proposal, doing this big drawing review, and the time in your day is a bucket, and if you fill the bucket with all the water and the sand first, you can't fit the rocks in it. So learning how to manage getting the big things out of the way and carving out chunks for dealing with all of the other little things and being able to flip back and forth. It's been something that I've struggled with my entire career.
Yeah, because again, I even remember coming out of school and then getting into work. One of the biggest things was everyone talks about time management, but nobody actually tells you how to do it until you're actually in it, where it's too late, right? It's a lesson that's oh yeah, you're gonna have X amount of hours for this, you'll be able to do. Not until you're actually doing the process, right? And I think that being able to nail that down kind of earlier and having somebody actually almost walk you through, being, like you said, describe what you would do differently, I think that's super important and a lesson that everybody could take. Not sure if you guys have anything else.
I was going to say, it's something that there's no manual on how to manage your own time, right? It's so personal, but at the same time, even some tips and tricks, right? At an early stage would be so valuable, right?
Just to play devil's advocate on that point,
course
though, I there's tips and tricks, sure, but at the end of the day, we're all wired differently.
Oh, of course.
And I'm a morning person, so a way that I help manage my times, I get up early and take care of a lot of little stuff before I even start my day, and that makes me feel better, puts my brain in a better state, and I'm more productive during the day as a result. But that doesn't work for everybody, and different things work for different people. So I think that's probably part of the reason why there is no training on time management, because it is so dependent on the individual components of it, right?
Yeah. And that's what I would say too, is as you kind of get older, there are things that you learn that you can kind of cut out and things that you want to spend more time on during not only at work, but again, also in your personal life, right? You're able to kind of blend the two together somehow and make it work for your ultimate.
I think it also relates back to we're a team, right? And having trust in your team members and their abilities, right? Let them shine, right? Let them have that opportunity and demonstrate whether or not, they can do it. Because in all likelihood, certainly in my experience, they can do it.
Yeah.
Delegate.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you guys for joining today. That's all we got. Thanks again to Don and John for joining us today on our first episode and sharing their knowledge and experience. Thanks for listening to the very first episode of The Workshop by Aplin Martin, and stay tuned for the next episode and have a great day.